Turn this over to Jay Baum, who's on our DEI committee and is also in public access sailing as a volunteer, and he'll moderate our panel today. So start thinking of your questions. Thanks.
All right, well, I think we're going to start with Betsy, actually.
Okay. Thanks for that, Rich. I'm not actually Jay, but I am Betsy, and most people know me. But anyway, I'm just going to take a moment or two and introduce our panelists today and then hand the mic over to Jay. So Jay, can you just change to the next slide, please?
Sorry.
So today we have on our panel Captain Donald Lawson. Don, you want to raise your hand? Donald is a professional sailor. He's a motivational speaker. He's a DEI advocate. He's a member of our U.S. Sailing DEI committee, and he is striving to be the first nonstop round-the-world sailor trying to set a record as an African American. So he's got some pretty big things going on, and he is planning on sailing in the next Vendée Globe in one of the 60-footers. So Donald is very welcome to be on this panel. Secondly, we have Preston Anderson, and Preston is from the Intercollegiate Sailing Association. He's on their TIDE group, which is the Inclusivity, Diversity, and Equity Taskforce that is working within college sailing to broaden understanding and knowledge of DEI issues. And Preston spent this past, well, I don't know, when was it, spring? No, summer? Anyway, Preston was our first full-time DEI intern who worked with U.S. Sailing on looking at other NGBs to see what they were doing from a DEI standpoint, and also to work with us on coordinating what college sailing is doing with the activities that U.S. Sailing is doing. Thirdly, we have Patrick Burks. Patrick is a board member and founder of the Rainbow Races. I put Regattas here, but the Rainbow Races. And those are a series of races in the Chicago area right now, but are going to be broadened and hopefully grow across the United States. And that's connecting the LGBTQ community and its allies through the sport of sailing and other events. So we're really happy to have Patrick with us. And then for those of you who don't know me, my name is Betsy, Alison. I'm the Director of Adult Programs at U.S. Sailing. I'm the DEI Committee Staff Liaison, and I spent the better part of 20 years coaching our Paralympic sailors. Plus, I'm a female, so I'm bringing that demographic to the table here. And then lastly, there's actually two other people I want to recognize. One is our board liaison. That's Brianna Provancha. And Bree comes to all our DEI committee meetings, which we hold once a month. Right now, our committee is about 8 strong, and we've got a lot of subcommittee members, but we can go into that later. And then also, I want to recognize Jay Baum. Jay Baum, as Rich mentioned, comes from Hudson River Community Sailing. He's an educator. He is, I wrote little notes here. A big DEI advocate. He has worked with Hudson River Community Sailing not only on their veterans programming, but they have a program for high school students. They partner with 10 New York City Title I public schools and use sailing as a training vehicle for leadership and academic skills. So they bring in a lot of students from underserved communities into the sport of sailing. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jay.
All right. So first, the big question, what is it we're trying to accomplish? What is DEI? Diversity includes many facets that make up the individual's identity. And you can read the slides, but the idea is that we want to make sure that people feel welcomed, and that diversity recognizes all of those various ways we identify ourselves. Equity is the fair treatment, access, and opportunity and advancement for all people. So again, we want to make sure people feel that they've got a place at the table and the ability to approach it without judgment. And finally, inclusion is making sure through practice and policy that there truly is equal access and equal opportunity, that we recognize that where there are challenges in the way we've approached a lot of things in a lot of various facets in this country, and we want to make sure that again, people are finding that they get to join in with everybody else in this great sport. So examples of that. Well, one of the things that we've done in the last year is we wanted to build a document that we call the Pillars that acts as a blueprint and a guide for the next several years for what we might accomplish at U.S. Sailing, leading the sport. So the first pillar is just a basic review, a little reflection on the way we run and the way U.S. Sailing is run at the staff level, at the board level, and at the committee level. And it's just that. It's looking at policies and documents, looking at the language that's used, making sure that things are gender neutral. I was talking with the new head of HR, Renee, and she was talking about things like we haven't always used an equal opportunity statement in our job postings. Basic standard practices that maybe were skipped over or missed until recently. Our second pillar, to recruit and retain. Again, this is to look at the board and the staff, and maybe we notice that there's a theme going on with our board and our staff, and maybe over time we should be trying to attract and retain a diverse range of individuals to U.S. Sailing to create an environment in which people feel that they can thrive and grow and that they're represented and that recognizes those differences and can reach out better, perhaps, to this diverse community. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to
Betsy.
Betsy.
So anyway, our third pillar, and I just want to credit Lou Sandoval from Chicago. Many of you know Lou, and he is super passionate about DEI. He was the leader on this DEI project. And just so you all know, these 6 pillars that we're presenting to you were presented to the U.S. Sailing Board of Directors and accepted in principle. And now it's up to the staff to start implementing some of the granular details of them. So I wanted to let you know this is in process right now, and it's a really exciting time. So pillar number 3 deals with equity, inclusion and equity. And we all know that this sport needs to grow in different areas, be it in female demographics, in racial diversity, in people with altered abilities, veteran participations. There are so many underserved groups currently within our sport, and we want to do a better job of that. We also want to recognize best practices that some of our member organizations are already doing, and we want to be able to share that. We want to make sure that our publications and videos that come out reflect demographic diversity. So that's one big part of what we're trying to do. Pillar number 4 really deals with community engagement and corporate partnerships. There's no reason why we shouldn't be leveraging our U.S. Sailing brand and voice to be more inclusive, to recognize companies and engage partners that reflect that diversity and that may be minority-owned businesses. So we're going to start looking outside of what we've been doing to improve our practices and to also do outreach outside of our typical sailing channels to reach underserved communities. We've been doing a good job of that with the Seabold Sailors program, but we need to do more. And whether it's in inviting people from the Black Lawyers Association in your neighborhood to come down and experience your yacht club environment or your sailing program, or reaching out to the LGBTQ community to come and participate and be part of what you're doing, there's a lot of great stuff that can happen with community engagement and our community partnerships. And then I'm going to pass the mic to Don.
Yeah, thank you. Branding and messaging is important for U.S. Sailing, and I guess everyone, to understand how you present yourselves, how people are going to treat you. And U.S. Sailing has, over the last couple of years, started presenting itself as an inclusive, open organization. And I think that's been really important, because if people don't see materials and see themselves in imagery, they're not going to feel like they're welcome there. And so I personally loved the annual report that came out about a week ago, I think it was. And the images inside of it spoke volumes about how U.S. Sailing is trying to be inclusive and already is inclusive. The second thing is organizational culture. And so this one's a little tougher because the culture of organization is all of us. How we feel in our hearts, how we treat each other is the culture. And so what it comes down to, we would like to hope that the pillars become not necessarily a guideline for the future, but become ingrained in how we operate. So I'll stop there for the time being.
You know, it came up recently on I think it was a DEI call where we were talking about things that as a culture we can start to do that included something as simple as on the many Zoom calls that we all participate in, when you have your name there, including things like your gender pronouns, and including gender pronouns in your signature at the end of your emails. And while many of us may look at that and go, I've never done that before, right? We spend a lot of time saying we've never done that before until we stop saying that, right? We've never done that before. Why do I need to do that? Well, you know your gender pronouns. You're comfortable with your gender pronoun, right? You know, you've always been she or you've always been him. Make it clear, right, that it doesn't bother you when somebody tells you that. And an easy way to do that would be, you know, that sort of thing. And that's the kind of thing, I don't want to, you know, get whiny about it. That's just an example of the sort of things that we're starting to suggest as an opportunity for, you know, changing organizational culture. So with that, I am pushing the wrong button. No, wait, I really didn't think I was.
No, I think that was the last.
Yeah.
That was the last slide.
last
Oh,
one.
I thought the questions were on this. So, all right. So we have questions. I thought the questions were going to pop up.
Yeah.
All right. So
We're going to talk about a couple of the best practices and things we've
I-
already engaged in.
I am going to talk about a couple of best practices and things that we
You see,
already engaged.
we're a pretty close committee. as
Thank you.
can tell.
Thank you for that. So some of the best practices, to give you a sense of the things that we've already accomplished, which is not as much as we would like, but it's not nothing. For example, the Sailing Hall of Fame.
Yeah. So we have subcommittees inside the committee itself, because we have 8 strong, but we have a bunch of other folks who help out. And one of the projects that we wanted to focus on, and Cruising World Magazine put an article out this summer about the lack of diversity in the Hall of Fame. They didn't know at the time that we had already been working on that. And there's a couple of people here from the Hall of Fame that know this already, but for those who don't know, we started working on this about a year and a half ago. And one of the goals was to honor those who earned the right to be honored, not because of their culture, but because of what they've done. And this class just went in about a month and a half ago, was most diverse ever. And so if you get a chance to check it out, go onto the website, take a look at the induction ceremony. Captain Bill Pinckney was the keynote speaker for Lifetime Achievement. And so he gave a great speech. I think it would be good just to realize that there are tons of minority sailing clubs in this country. And a lot of folks don't know that. But there's like I'm part of another one in Baltimore called USC that's been around for 20 years. This was the 20th anniversary last month. And so there are people out there doing things, but if U.S. Sailing does not reach out to include them, you know, U.S. Sailing is really missing out in that respect. So,
Okay. Of course, the pillar document itself is one of our big efforts in the last year. And just the photo library, and here are a couple of good examples. We've got a photo library, which we're starting to build some diversity within the library. Didn't have very much of that at all before. So, and then I know there was something else. Oh, there's been an update to the website that makes us more accessible to local sailing organizations. We've been getting questions through this, essentially a DEI hotline, asking what we can do at the local level, and we've been able to stay in touch with some of the constituents that way. So, on to the questions. Okay, I'm going to start with the last one first. Somebody asked today. I wonder why. They said, "What are we doing, or what should be done, or what can be done when people are using girls instead of women when talking about adult women. And what might be the response for an organization for people to deal with that. So one thing that I can say I've been comfortable doing is pointing that out to people who are, describing the men that they've been teaching, maybe the boys that they've been teaching also, and the girl. So I'll pull somebody aside and say, I'm not sure if you're aware that you're using this language. We get used to the language that we use. We don't think about it. Just think about it. Talk to the people that you're talking about and ask them how they would like to be addressed or referred to, right? And if you're talking about somebody who's 17, maybe she's fine being called a girl. I suspect when they're 20, probably not. And I don't know, but I don't want to be a scold. Go and talk to people and see whether they're comfortable with the way you're referring to them. So that's the sort of thing that we might be able to do to help change the mindset and the way we refer to people and make them feel more welcomed. So, one example. Yes. Oh. Nope. All right. All right, I'm just going to go through the list. Now, if anybody wants to preempt me and raise a hand, if anybody wants to preempt me in the room, or if we get something else that comes in, probably better than my just going through the list, but yes? Do we have, yes. Jane, we're going to get you a microphone. One's coming up.
Hi. So I was wondering if you could explain the difference between equity and equality, because I'm finding in different circles a lot of people don't know the difference.
I was going to say no. I'm happy to answer that I can't do that, but
So I saw a meme that I wish I could put on the screen right now, where equality really is where everyone has kind of like the same step. So picture a fence in front of you, right? And this is actually the meme I have on my phone, so I can't pull it up. But picture a fence, and you're watching a baseball game, and you're 5'10". You can see over the fence, and the person next to you is 4'2", and they can't see over the fence. And the person's like 2 foot, and they can't see over the fence either. That's equality. Everyone's standing on the same plateau, but they can't see the same opportunities, see the same thing. Equity is where you say, okay, you're 5'11". You don't need the stand you're standing on. So hand that to the person who does need to stand, help them be able to see the game at the same time. So it's about creating opportunity. You have to intentionally do things to help those who are less fortunate. And I think sometimes it's contrary to our nature to want to give up something that you may not need, that someone else does need to make things work. So hopefully that was good. Oh, yeah, so hopefully that was good. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. It was more for the room than myself, but thank you.
it's good. Thank you. Thank you for bringing it up. Right. So this is a good point. Treating everybody equally, it is going to be a challenge, right? But treating everybody fairly is an entirely different challenge. That's all. All right. Some of the questions from the list that came in with registration. So, Cybal Sailors focuses on. I keep doing that. It's Cybal Sailors focuses on democratizing youth sailing by supporting community sailing efforts. What is U.S. Sailing doing to support diversity among adult sailors?
That's a tricky question because it really depends on the environment that you find yourselves in. I mean, to be honest, there are a lot of community-based sailing programs, that Rich was referring to, that are already embracing people from different areas and cultures and different socioeconomic backgrounds. I think that point of access exists, and it may not be as commonplace around the United States as we would like it to be, just because there are a finite number of community sailing programs now, but that's where we see the biggest growth potential in the United States. It's rare to see a yacht club forming these days. There are a lot of very established ones, but the growth is happening at community sailing. And I think we're seeing that within adult sailing with sailing schools. Sailing schools tend to be, sailing schools themselves don't see color, don't see, they're taking people who are novices for the most part and blending them into and introducing them to the sport of sailing. So I think that's a big part of what we are and what we can do to bring a more diverse population into it. So we don't have any funded programs like the Seabold Sailors program for adult sailing at this point in time. It doesn't mean that it couldn't happen as we go down the road, but we certainly want to learn best practices from everybody that's out there, what you're doing, so that we can pass those resources on to other clubs and organizations that want to do more outreach and get more people from diverse backgrounds involved.
And another example is, and you brought it up earlier when you're talking about reaching out to the local Black Attorneys Association or Hispanic Doctors Association. This is a technique that Karen Harris, our chair, has used and talked about in the past. And it's, what are we doing on the panel, and what is the U.S. Sailing doing, making answers like this available? When local sailing organizations say, we're not looking to give away memberships, Karen is very quick to point out, you don't have to give away a membership to a doctor or to an attorney. You just have to stop advertising to all of the same people that you've always been advertising to. If you've got a lovely clubhouse like this, and you know that organizations hold their own monthly association meetings, and you're looking for new members, because who isn't looking for new members, just to invite them in and say, you can have your Thursday night meeting, in our location, but we'd like 5 minutes on the podium so that we can talk about membership opportunities. That is a way of reaching out to a community.
So I just want to know from Preston, we're talking high school, kids coming from high school going into college sailing. You've got a wealth of sailors in college sailing. How can we as a community leverage what sailors are doing in college and get them involved in more aspects of adult sailing in the United States?
So it's interesting, just as I think about this now, earlier today we were talking about volunteerism and getting involved with umpiring, and I know there's a movement within NISA, at least that's the conference that my team's a part of, we want our alumni to come back and umpire our events. So possibly kind of forming a link to be able to have more college alumni, and building a database or a contact to get those alumni umpiring is another way.
What's the next step for you guys when you're leaving college to get engaged with the local community sailing centers and yacht clubs and whatnot? What's the next step for you guys? Because, there's a lot of adults here in the room and a lot of club members and whatnot. How do we better embrace, you guys coming out of college now?
I think we need to know what's out there. A lot of sailors, want to stay involved with the sport, but don't know how. There's, unless you've been a part of the sport for a long time, just making sure people know that there are beer can races that you can be a part of, or, getting on crew lists for offshore events, just making sure that we understand ways, easy access to getting onto, post-college events.
One other opportunity that we've taken pretty good advantage of through the committee is helping to populate some of the Starboard Portal discussion groups, right? So we've seen those panels. There have been any number of them on diversity. I think our next opportunity is to move from panels on diversity to diverse panels. I think we've I don't want to say we've had enough of. That's not quite quite where I'm going with it, but I think we've got many conversations. I've seen many conversations about ethnic diversity and how you bring that in. But I think one of the things that we can model, and I'm hoping to see that more of that in the future, is a race panel that is not all white. Right, simple as that. Right, and there's, it's U.S. sailing. We're going to have plenty more starboard portal videos about racing and about the rules of racing and about sail trim and about. Right, but it seems like, again, there's a common theme to who gets invited to those to most of those panels. So I think there's an opportunity there to adjust over the next year. All right. Next question is, I'm just looking around the room before I do that. U.S. Sailing has supported adaptive sailing through the Paralympics and more recently through the adaptive sailing instructor certification. What is U.S. Sailing doing to nudge or even advertise to members of organizations to put accessibility on their agenda?
Well, that's a really great question, and it's something I've been involved with for quite some time, as well as I'm going to give a shout out to Judy McLennan in the back. The Claggett Clinic and Regatta is an event that's been going on for 20 years now, and it has been doing, Judy and her committee and team has been doing a great job of embracing parasailors, sailors with altered abilities. We have everything from physical disabilities to blind sailors and everything in between, and they work very closely with their able-bodied counterparts to build skill, and that's really what this is all about, is an inclusive community and environment. It's not an us versus them and whatnot. One of the things that we've seen a lot of growth in recent years is the growth of participation by people in adaptive instructor workshops. This year we had 42 people take our adaptive workshops so that they could offer and be better prepared to help sailors with challenges and disabilities learn how to sail better, and at the introductory stages, what you can do to help assist. And we've publicized it out through various channels, on our website, through conversations, through the quarter deck and whatnot. And I think the biggest challenge that we have faced is people not believing that their facility can handle and accommodate people with disabilities. And we encourage people to say, do what you can. If you don't have a very physically accessible facility, you might want to just start working with people with vision impairments. Or you might want to work with kids, your junior program with kids with autism. And a lot of families, 1 out of every 6 families has a person or persons in their family that has a disability. So it's far more commonplace than we recognize, yet, we don't embrace it on a level that we should or could. So we welcome people to get involved, in clubs to get involved, in community sailing programs to get involved with adaptive sailing. Start small, grow from there, but we definitely have people and resources that can help you help yourselves, as we go forward. And you will note that if you've ever seen our Paralympians, many of them are wheelchair users or amputees. They're sailing in open competitions all the time against able-bodied sailors every weekend out on the water. And I would encourage you, when you do run into some of those sailors, have a conversation with them. It's not really that scary. It's just intimidating when you're not used to it. But they're some of the coolest people in the world. And I think if we don't embrace our disabled sailors and their family members, and if you think many of your own club members and organization members age and start having strokes or having mobility issues, that's going to be us one day. So if we can set ourselves up in a good space, I think the organization's going to be better for it.
I do have a question. I hate that cut in front of you, but back the bid for is it Paris or Los Angeles? Can you tell us more about that? Ellie, can you tell us about that real quick?
Yeah, and as Paul mentioned, we were removed from the slate of events for not having enough countries that actively and regularly participated in parasailing. Well, IPC wanted 32 countries. They recognized 28, and I'm happy to say, working with World Sailing, we've gotten up to over 40 countries that are participating in parasailing, and we will be putting forward that application shortly. One of the things that sailing has struggled with, although just recently the IOC recognized Tokyo 2020 for sailing as the gold medal for media coverage, which was fantastic for the sport of sailing. What we're trying to do in parasailing is get that buzz going out and getting the media, whether it's through social media, whether it's through print communications, getting parasailing on the tip of the tongue of as many people as we can out there. And Back the Bid is a social media campaign where we love to have people, and Preston can show you what ICSA has done on his phone at a break, but it's taking a picture of yourself holding the hashtag Back the Bid, Sail to LA 2028, and posting on your social media channels and getting your kids in your sailing programs and club members to do that, because the more we get it out, the stronger the bid's going to be. And this is not happening just in the United States, it's happening worldwide right now. And it's pretty exciting to see the buzz that's going on.
And just to continue what you were saying about, we are all minute by minute an aging population, and I sail with a veterans group at Hudson River Community Sailing, and it skews older, although we have some younger veterans as well. And there are certainly days when on my boat, the median number of working knees is something under 1 per person. And just knowing, oh, I'm going to remember that line. Got to laugh. And there are definitely techniques that we've figured out how to, do we have to switch sides on every tack? Is it enough? Maybe it's enough that the rest of the boat switches sides and the helmsperson doesn't. The timing of switching sides, is it okay to stall the boat for a moment in the middle of a tack as long as you still got momentum? While it's level, everybody has that extra few seconds. Do you call out, is everybody seated before you continue? But little things like that are part of it. And I think there's probably room to learn just from the casual sailor versus the Paralympic sailor or the parasailor, how we might be able to benefit each other. And I think those are things that we can do at the adult level that's a little different. I saw Stuart's got a question coming in.
Thank you, Jay. We have a question from the live stream here from Teresa Davis, who asked, she said, Camp Seagull asked for a list of sailing organizations by location so they can give graduates a list of local sailing organizations to continue their interest in sailing. Does U.S. Sailing have anything like this? So,
Are we talking about for parasailing, or are we talking about
I think it's more of a general question about giving people on-ramps, but I think you could also target it in that space too.
It's a tricky question. We have lists of places to sail that we can connect people to. We have learn to sail locations. We have first sail locations that are all lists that exist on the U.S. Sailing website, as well as clubs and organizations, whether they are community sailing programs. We have lists of community sailing programs. So yes, we can direct people. Whether we have print lists that we circulate, no, it's something we could do, and we update all the time. But I would suggest that all of our find a place to sail, we try to update fairly frequently to make sure that it is accessible and that that those lists are updated.
Would it also be possible to add to your list the demographics that each local sailing organization is very specific to reaching out to?
That's a database question. To be honest, in our system right now, I'm not sure that those fields are available, but I do know that U.S. Sailing as a whole is looking at a new database member management system, and I think within that we should be able to accommodate more than we currently do. So is there room for growth? Absolutely. Could we do better? Yes. And I think it's an opportunity, as Alan mentioned earlier today. We have to look at what currently exists and what we can grow from, and it's this type of input that makes it easier for us to serve our membership better and do a better job. So, I would be lying to say that everything is perfect, but I think we can provide resources, and we're happy to do so.
And actually, this is a great segue for Patrick to tell us how you guys created your group in Chicago.
Sure. I think we have another question in the room. I'll try to be quick though. But Rainbow Races started as a couple of sailors in Chicago. One was flying a giant pride flag as they came into one of the harbors, apparently. The other, someone else, after they docked, went up, started chatting with them, and said, hey, we need to do more for the LGBT community. And thus they got together, formed a nonprofit, and started hosting events. Unfortunately, it was right before COVID, so things were a little rocky this past year to get to continue the momentum, but we're approaching 2022 with renewed momentum to, particularly in the Chicago area, keep things going, with the main event being the Rainbow Regatta that is usually in conjunction with Market Days, one of the big pride festivities in Chicago. And there's been people from all over the world interested in and reaching out to us to try to find ways to have Rainbow Regatta have multiple locations on the same date, something or another, that we're looking for in the future. First, we're trying to make sure 2022 goes extremely well, get more in-person participation in the Chicago area, possibly bring in some one design classes, to get some more serious racers involved, as well as the big thing for us as an organization is using diversity as a way to reach out to communities to bring new people into sailing, and that's all types of sailing. Everything from cruising to beer can racing. We work pretty closely with Karen, actually, at Jackson Park Yacht Club in the Chicago area. So one of the initiatives that we're working on as well is to get the families of the kids who are in their junior program, which is a Siebel location as well, get the parents out sailing to, open up those opportunities. Once the junior program ends, the family's now addicted to sailing, get all of them out on the water and keep going.
Preston, it was a question for you. So how do I reach out to college-age kids who are home for the summer? Most of them are sailing instructors, but if they're not, or recent college grads, I'll give them boats after hours, or say you can pay $5 or $1 or it's free. Where do I find them?
I think a lot of us utilize social media, so getting that information out on social media, but also another way is emailing coaches directly or teams directly. Each team will probably have like a coach you can contact, or a team email that you can contact and get information out to them. And that's an easy way to kind of, then the coach can get it to their distribution list, or the team can get it to their distribution list. And that's an easy way to kind of advertise what you're trying to do.
Thank you.
I got it.
Success story?
Yes, Jim.
36 years ago, we started a program for kids with learning differences, and we used sailing as a way to build their self-confidence and their self-image, and it has been incredibly successful. And in fact, a lot of our support comes from parents kids have been through the program, and 6 of our kids have come up to be instructors in it, and one of them was just accepted to the United States Naval Academy.
Preston, tell us about Tide. I'm interested in what animated the emergence of Tide in a population that one would expect and hope, at least, would be leaning in to DEI issues. And what are the challenges in intercollegiate sailing around DEI? It's an interesting population to look at.
Yeah, so the summer of 2020, right after the George Floyd murder happened, I was sitting at home and had a lot of discussions on my campus. I'm also a part of the Boat and Athletes of Color Coalition, and Black Student Union, and just a bunch of other on-campus organizations that were having just a lot of Zoom meetings about like what can we do within our own communities and our sports, and that got me thinking. Sailing, the athletes of color wanted to do stuff with the NESCAC. We are a NESCAC school, so we wanted to link up, like do a lot of work with them. And that got me thinking, sailing's kind of different. We have our own governing body. Are there things that we can do? So I reached out to my coach and a bunch of other sailors I knew across NISA, and we were able to form a committee within NISA first. And then at the same time, Mitch Brindley and the ICSA had a national town hall to kind of think about, what can we do as a national body. And he appointed, and I guess there were a lot of coaches that were talking about, like, are there things that we can do? So around the same time, he actually appointed my assistant coach, Corey, to be the national chair of a diversity and inclusion committee. And as we all kind of started meeting nationally and within New England, we wanted to find ways that conferences can work within each conference, to figure out regional like issue challenges and regional solutions, but also nationally. So we thought, we can call it all Tide, and we'll have the ICSA Tide Taskforce, which is focusing on a national movement and having regional representatives share what they're working on within their own regions. And then NISA, which is a part of my there's NISA Tide, there's Mesa Tide, CESA, and then CISA and West Coast. And so it's a national movement. And about in the fall of 2020, we launched 2 projects. One of the projects that I was working on in particular was an education project. So it was just kind of, we formed a discussion series on, different, like how can we talk about microaggressions, race, team culture. And then the other project, which had Corey, who is the chair and assistant coach that really worked on this project, was a report. And there's about a 40 to 50 page report on the College Sailing website about our demographics, challenges that we faced. So those were our 2 big projects last fall. So now we have an understanding of like what our demographics are in college sailing, and kind of building off that report. We're still working on a lot on education. So there are a lot of discussions on race and how can we make our teams more inclusive. At least in New England, we're doing a lot of community outreach as well. So trying to figure out ways that we can get teams working with community sailing centers. I know there was, we helped initiate a program at Sail Newport to kind of work with local high school, local public school, and getting those kids like involved with sailing. So those are 2 really big projects that we've been working on nationally in New England.
Okay, I'm going to jump back to our list. I've got one here. What is the board's take on U.S. Sailing's DEI efforts? And I don't know that we're the right ones to answer that.
I think that should come up at the leadership questions.
Okay.
Let's push that off to the board.
We'll push that one off to the board. Okay, good. Let's see. U.S. Sailing offers training for leaders across the sport. Are there any plans or opportunities for training current leaders on how to better advocate for BIPOC and other groups that are underrepresented in the sport?
That'll probably be another question for them.
Well, I don't know.
We can get suggestions, but
Okay. Yeah. We'll hold that one till later. All right. What specific progress has been made by U.S. Sailing? I'm concerned that we're running a theme here. U.S. Sailing in DEI focus areas. What lessons have been learned since launching the DEI initiative at U.S. Sailing? I think we've covered a lot of it for what we've learned and what we've been able to share.
I got one thing I'll toss in there real quick. No, man. No, please. No.
The one thing I wanted to say to that point is I think one of the things that we've learned so far is that education is critical to understanding. And I know within staff, there's efforts underway to have external DEI training so that we as a staff and a leadership team understand better how to, to really embrace the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, obviously, our staff is not particularly diverse right now, but I know that practices have been put into place, and I know we've got 2 new interns in, DEI interns in, that are working with the HBCUs. I got to get the acronym right. The historically Black colleges and universities to for job postings at job fairs and whatnot, so that we're doing more outreach in areas that we haven't typically done before, which is really exciting. But I do know that the staff is really passionate about this, and we want to make sure that we create an environment so that anyone who comes into the organization will feel welcomed and comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I personally appreciate the work U.S. Sailing's been doing because ultimately, Paul was up here talking, and I think Charlie, she was sitting here talking about the goals of the future, what we're trying to achieve. And there's very few sports in this country where you can sit down and think to yourself, we're only using a percentage of our population to compete internationally. And if you think about it from the standpoint that the rest of the world has their best athletes competing in their sports, and we do not, is part of the problem. And so I'm hopeful, because there's a lot of young people coming up, like these guys are here, of course, and then you look at the single-handed championships this past weekend with Charlotte and Leo. That's a bright future for us. And so the more effort we put into the TIE program and developing people, the better our future is going to be. And part of my motivation personally is that I want to see the sport grow. I don't want it to be a situation where, it's the same place it was in the 1980s where I first started off. And so I'm just grateful that U.S. Sailing is putting forth the effort and leading the way for it.
Yeah, and one thing that I've learned just doing a lot of the work with the college sailing is, it might be, college sailing offers an opportunity that may be a little bit more accessible with, just probably playing, little low team dues, or if you're walking onto a varsity team, not really paying anything, to be able to have the opportunity to learn how to sail and compete at a high level. And I think that's, we want to look at, where our sport is like most accessible and find ways to get more people involved with our sport through those most accessible ways. And that's how we can, grow our sport.
And I just want to say, to Preston's point, and the chair of our One Design committee is here, one of the things we're really trying to do to encourage and embrace young people coming out of college who haven't had a lot of costs for, boat ownership or participation. There are a lot of One Design classes that we have listed on our One Design Central page that it lists local fleets wherever you happen to be going. If you're going from Vermont to moving to Okoboji, Iowa, we can tell you what the local One Design fleets are. And a lot of these fleets really want young people to come into the sport. They're willing to, loan them boats or have them be part of their team. So we really want, through our One Design classes, and there are 120 classes that are members of U.S. Sailing, 150 around the United States, that we want to engage young people in those, and I think you can do it in a very affordable way. So those opportunities are there, and I'm sure if we asked Matt Gallagher, there'd be plenty of offshore opportunities for kids that want to go that direction.
Just what to say, because Jim Modine's right here, and I started racing with him on his boat a decade ago, and it wasn't for him, I would have been still on smaller boats inland. So Jim helped me out quite a bit. And so there's offshore boats like his required crews of 13, 14 people. And so you tell me you can't get 5 young people walking the dock to hop on the boat and go sailing? So just want to toss that out there.
Yeah, and I mean, on the topic of continuing people sailing and getting new people into the sport, that's where I'm going to put in a plug for my other passion in racing, which is match racing, where, again, you don't have to own the boat. Pretty much all of the events are in provided boats for the regatta. You show up, pay a little bit more entry fee than you would in a bring your own boat fleet race, but then everything's provided for. You don't have to do any of the boat work, put in the prep, drive necessarily towing a boat to the location. And there's plenty of opportunities for match racing. For team racing is often the same thing. You can get into a lot of different boats in those events as well. And I mean, again, also on the racing end, you're put into situations where you definitely learn the rules very quickly or get a lot of penalty flags from the umpires. Both work.
Yeah. All right.
I think we can pretty much all accept that the primary entry points are community sailing and then continuing on to yacht clubs, right? I mean, that's the access to the water, right? Does the committee and does U.S. Sailing, what is their sense of our yacht clubs, which are the second step for a lot of people, embracing DEI, or is it still kind of a hands-off thing around the country?
To not exactly answer your question, but actually kind of argue one of the points, I don't think we should keep making the distinction between community sailing and yacht clubs. We should just be talking about local sailing organizations, the primary interface to get people on the water. Some are yacht clubs, some are local sailing, community sailing like Hudson River. I'm still not sure exactly what form Rainbow Races is going to take, but the point is to get people sailing, keep people sailing. And if we distinguish between the two, we're just going to continue to divide, I think, and often on these not exactly diverse lines. Yeah. I think that's one of the big keys to moving forward for the sport is, doing all of that. And the more that yacht clubs can purchase fleets of shared boats, the more young people you're going to attract. The less barrier to entry, the more younger people you're going to attract so that you can keep going.
Yeah, and to go along a lot with that, yacht clubs are organizations, institutions that depend on memberships. And so if you want the yacht clubs to survive, you're going to have to bring in more talent, more people who care about the sport. And so in my experience, sailing centers have a slightly better model because they have a recycling clientele, if you will. And so when you look at it from that standpoint, yacht clubs can do the same exact thing the sailing centers are doing. So at some point in time, perhaps there could be an integration or a modeling with it.
But back to the question. One of the things I think, Dave, the point that you bring up is, oh my God, now I just lost my train of thought. Isn't that awful?
Say the question again.
Do yacht clubs support what you're doing? Right. So, good point. So that's where I was going. We actually put a survey out. It's actually not a survey, questionnaire in 2019 asking for DEI best practices. And we got responses back from a lot of organizations, some community sailing programs, some yacht clubs and whatnot. And in the interim, between then and now, with COVID having shut down a lot of things, and the different injustices that have happened with the George Floyd murder and other circumstances that have been highly publicized, I think the issue of race and diversity and inclusion has become more commonplace on people's tongues across the country. And it has been very encouraging to hear a lot of people at yacht clubs, at community sailing programs, at local sailing organizations, within classes and associations, talking about DEI, and it's becoming more of the woven thread that is pervading everything. And it's everything from how do we include more women? How do we get more people with disabilities? How do we embrace more people of color? And I think we're seeing that more from the younger generations. It's common, much more commonplace at the youth and teenage into college levels, where it's talked about far more. And I think for many of us, it becomes a little more generational, where some of us that are a little older face some more personal barriers in terms of, am I using the right terminology? Am I saying the right thing? Am I going to offend somebody if I say something a certain way? To your point, Jane, on, women and girls, we try our best to address adult women as women and talk about female sailors and whatnot. But generationally, sometimes people slip up because it's just like, oh, it's girls and guys. It's not something that everyone thinks about consciously all the time. And I think people are making much bigger effort to understand the differences that we have because we're all being brought together by a common interest.
Yeah, and just to add one more thing to that, just real quick, is that obvious statement. I'm African American, of course, and I tell people all the time, you can't blame people for what they don't know. Okay, too often people get upset if you say a phrase a certain way, and I can't believe you said that. Like, well, what did I say wrong? And if that's an opportunity to educate someone and teach them something. And so once the person knows, then you have a right to make a choice at that stage. But I think part of being inclusive is understanding that it's a two-way street. It's my job to educate someone and be patient with them, allow them to learn the material at the same time. And so I keep mentioning these two because they're younger than I am, which is funny to say. But there's things I'm learning now from them, and I'm like, I can't say the bad word. What in the world does that mean? I don't know what that is. And they're like, well, is this? And I'm like, okay. But at the same time, now that I know, I have to make a choice. And hopefully by making the right choice, I can avoid causing conflict. So.
Okay. And I'm going to bring it back to David's question, which was about yacht clubs and not community sailing centers. And so, and to agree to a small extent with Patrick's lack of distinction, we have had some questions come to the committee through there's a DEI mailbox about what a local yacht club or what local yacht clubs can do. And most are bring your own boat. But I think, and your experience is collectively in this room is much greater than mine. I think there are enough abandoned boats at the end of the season. There are people who haven't paid their fees. There are enough boats out there that yacht clubs end up owning that they don't want to. That bring your own, strictly speaking, bring your own boat yacht clubs don't really exist. There's always a boat. Sometimes it's a small fleet of opties that the kids use for summer camp. Sometimes it's a larger collection or newer boats or larger boats. And I think there are opportunities there to get the community involved, maybe in a little sweat equity and a little rehabilitation, and it becomes a small sailing club for a small number of people. Maybe it's some of the people who have been sailing around for a while and they've lost their crew and they're looking for a crew, get to use the club boat, or maybe they get to bring people out on their own boat. We're getting those questions as to how yacht clubs can bring people in, and I think for a lot of them, it's not the yacht club that's going to do it. It's individual members. Maybe it's a younger crowd that's looking at it and seeing what we're discussing, and it's, my parents' generation did it differently, but I'm here too. And there are opportunities to reach out and bring people in from a broader community.
Yeah, one more question. I hate to point it out, but I can go.
We're about 15 minutes over time this, but it's a really important topic. So I think let's address the one question that we have here, and then we'll move along to the next panel.
15 years ago, we started having a program on a college campus, and the kids stayed in the dorms, and the college had a racing sailboat team too, and boy, the results of that have been really good.
What school was that?
St. Mary's.
Yeah, one thing that I've been trying to, this is more of a college sailing focus, but it kind of builds off of what Karen Harris was talking about with, inviting the Black Lawyers Association to your yacht club and trying to expand outward to bring more people in. One thing that I tried to do last spring with my team is, I worked on connecting the Black Student Union and bringing them for a sailing day with our sailing team, so that they so that they can experience, what actually sailing is. And that's kind of something that I've been slowly working on within Tide, is like, how can we build resources to connect with different affinity groups on our own campuses to be able to, share our sport that we love and kind of introduce it to them. So there we go.
I'm going to hand it back over to you, Josh.
Thank you, Jay. And that's we did go a little bit over time, but it's a really important topic, so I'm glad we did. Before we go, Jay, you mentioned the DEI inbox. If people want to get involved or ask questions, how do they contact you guys, the DEI committee?
Does anybody remember what the email address? It's on the webpage.
Yes.
How about for the live stream people into the mic?
DEI@ussailing.org.
And the easiest way of doing it is this is proof of U.S. Sailing's growth. Literally, just go to U.S. Sailing's website and go to the diversity, equity, inclusion page, and the contact information is right there.
Awesome. Hey, let's give it up for the panelists. Thank you, Betsy, Alison, Patrick, Burke, Captain Donald Lawson, Preston Anderson, and thank you, Jay Baum, for moderating. And you guys.